And a very good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'm Carol Massar, co-host of Bloomberg Business Week TV and radio, as well as host of the annual Breakaway CEO Network Summit. Very familiar with so many of you. I do hope this finds you and your family and your loved ones safe and sound. I know it's been a very difficult time. I have to say, I'm so excited about this gathering today. It is our first virtual Breakaway event of the year. And today we're going to focus on a couple of things and really navigating through the current business environment and ultimately what we think the other side looks like. We've been having so many conversations at Bloomberg about what post-COVID-19 looks like. It's an unprecedented global crisis, a health crisis, and unprecedented measures on so many different levels. Business leaders around the world are all searching for a way through. So today we're going to look at a couple of areas that seem to be of critical importance. One is, no doubt about it, the CEO agenda, how top corporate decision makers are setting priorities when everything is really on fire at once, having to tackle so much and really think about so many different stakeholders at the same time. The other very important is communications and messaging. And we've seen different strategies from different types of leaders and companies. We're lucky enough to have two of the top names in public relations with us today for that discussion, and we encourage all of you to send us your questions. Before we begin, like usual, we have a few housekeeping notes, so let me go through them. We're new to virtual events, so please be patient with us. I'm in my home. The dog could come running in. Hopefully it won't. But bear with us if we have a few technical issues. We're pretty quick about fixing them. If you're having trouble with audio or video quality, this is really important. Just refresh your browser. That tends to fix many things. This is also an important event, and it's an interactive event. And we, as always, want to talk with you. So we welcome your questions. We've already gotten some pre-advanced questions. They've been terrific, but keep sending them in. Now, to submit a questions, type it into the Q&A box. It's below the slide window. Click submit. Do remember to include your name and your company and your location so that we can give you a shout out if we get to your question. We're also going to do a bunch of polling just a few times throughout this event. The poll questions, they'll pop up on your screen as we're talking, so look for that as well. Also, it's a social event, so do feel free to reach out on Twitter using hashtag Bloomberg Breakaway. Okay, so I do want to get started because our first guest is amazing. Alan Jope is the Chief Executive Officer of a massive company. You use their brands. We're talking about Unilever. Unilever, as you might know, is a $60 billion plus company. It's home to over 400 brands. It's used by about 2.5 billion people daily. So, Alan, thank you so much for joining us. Delighted to have you with us. Your reach is just incredible. So welcome.
Hi, Carol. Hi, nice to see you. Good afternoon from Edinburgh. Good morning in New York.
So I want to first just put out for everybody, because Unilever has done some incredible things, and you really, I talk about stakeholders, and you guys almost from day one reached out to them. For global consumers and communities, you committed to providing free soap, sanitizer, bleach, and food. That was about €100 million commitment. You thought about your customers and suppliers, and that was about €500 million euro of really cash flow relief to those within your supply chain and your value chain. Your workforce, you came out and said that you would protect them from sudden drops in pay. And this was for up to 3 months. So you thought about that. And it's not just the people who get a Unilever paycheck. It's also contractors. It's the folks that work in your cafeteria. It's the folks that clean your offices. And you also raised about $2 billion in a euro bond issuance. That was on 3/20. You did a lot so quickly. I think a lot of it came just one day after Boris Johnson locked down the UK because of the virus. Tell me a little bit what that was like, what was going on internally, and what enabled you to pivot so quickly.
Well, thanks, Carol. We've been operating a multi-stakeholder model now for quite some time, for about 10 years now. We've been explicit that we believe that if we look after our employees and our customers, if we worry about society and the planet, if we take care of our supplier partners, then ultimately our shareholders will be well rewarded. And although we didn't honestly think it through that way, that was kind of how it played out for us. Our reflex was, first of all, to take care of our employees. I remember on March the 12th, which was a Thursday, our crisis team saying we should go into an immediate global mandatory 100% indefinite lockdown for all office employees. At the time, it felt a little overwhelming. but it was in the interest of protecting our employees. By the Friday when we announced it on the 13th, it felt just right. By the Saturday, the 14th, I wasn't sure if we were moving fast enough. And this was ahead of any government suggestions of lockdown other than in China. And then quickly we turned to our community, and you mentioned some of the things we tried to do there. Then we realized how important the ability to continue to supply, keeping our factories running and our supply networks running would be. Then we started to worry about cash and cost. And now at the moment, we're trying to anticipate and work to short and longer term changes in demand patterns. So I think that multi-stakeholder thinking, which we'd been getting used to for a decade, served us well in the initial days of this crisis.
How surprised were you, though, by the scale and pace of the virus?
I think one of the benefits of being a truly global company, and remember 60% of our turnover comes from outside of Western Europe and North America, are the biggest businesses in Unilever beyond the US are India, Brazil, China, Indonesia. And so I've been in daily contact with our leader in China and our leader in Italy. We had employees impacted by coronavirus, and we had already stood up an international crisis management team, actually, I think before the beginning of March. We had sort of anticipated this to come as it has. I must say, though, I'm very worried about the global south. We've seen this play out where, the healthcare systems of Wuhan, of Italy, of the United Kingdom, and the United States have at best been taxed and in some ways been overwhelmed. I'm very worried what's going to happen when this really takes hold in the favelas of Brazil, the townships of Africa, the slums of India, and the refugee camps around the Middle East. I really don't think we've seen the worst human suffering yet, as difficult as it is to say that.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because I think we talk about that too. We look at these developing markets. What's your responsibility in helping those markets? And I'm just curious the conversations you might be having with leaders in those markets.
Yeah, I think it's multifactorial, of course. I mean, our basic responsibility is people do need soap and bleach and surface cleaners and basic foodstuffs. Soap is at the moment still the first line of defense against this virus. So our first responsibility is to keep manufacturing and producing the products. We've noticed most governments going through a predictable pattern, which is to underreact and then perhaps to overreact to the point where the whole supply chain in the country shuts down. And at that point, we've been quite proactive with governments to say you really don't want to shut down supplies of essential goods. And we're in the middle of those discussions right now in the emerging market. And then all the way to in Africa, for example, where there's some really basic healthcare that's missing. We're right now building hospitals. We've shipped out ventilators. We've converted schools into hospitals in some of the tea gardens, for example, that we have in Kenya and Tanzania. So we're really in very active preparation mode. We have also shipped tests, the antigen tests, to some markets where government testing is a very low penetration, but we have big groups of employees. So we've found ourselves in medical and ethical space that we haven't been in before, but we do think it's part of our responsibility in looking after our people.
I was going to do this later, but let me bring in the polling question for our Breakaway members, and I'll read it out for you, Alan. Which group of stakeholders should corporations be prioritizing right now? And the choices are employees, communities, shareholders, customers. So as everybody weighs in on that, how do you see it? I think I know your answer. Go ahead.
Yeah, is that a one answer only question? Because in which case it's a tough call, because ultimately you have to look after all these stakeholders, but it for sure begins with your employees. Without showing authentic care for your employees, you can't respond. I mean, I don't do anything as the chief exec of this company. It's our frontline people who are making the goods, who are serving our customers. So that, for me, that's where it starts. Paul seems to be kind of suggesting it. But
I know you almost need an all of the above. Well, talk to me about your workers, because as we said at the top, you're taking care of your workers right now. So you haven't laid anybody off. Does it get harder the longer this goes on?
Yes, it does. We've got about 150,000 employees on the payroll, although we think every day there's about 3 million people who work directly and only for Unilever. But of those 150,000, there's about 70,000 of us who are office-based. There's about 50,000 of us who are in factories, and there's another 20 or 30,000 who operate in some kind of field sales operation. And we've had to take very different approaches for those different communities and also in different geographies at different points in time. So, as I mentioned, all 70,000 office workers are working from home, with the exception of China, where we're learning from China how to reopen offices, some do's and some don'ts. We're very conscious that for some people, working at home is liberating, and for other people, it's absolute torture, depending on the physical conditions you're in, the family conditions you're in. We're very worried about things like emotional stress. We're very worried about domestic abuse, which is dramatically on the rise around the world. So we've got a set of policies and an approach for our office workers. Of course, our factories are the safest place where many employees will spend parts of their day. We've got very strict hygiene protocols on the way into the factories. While you're in there, we've got people working socially distanced. We've got massive amounts of PPE. There is, by the way, no global shortage of PPE. You could get as much face masks, gloves, eye protection, basic overalls as you need, so long as you take an international approach to sourcing. And then for field sales employees, obviously, we're encouraging them to do their selling virtually where they can. That might be over the phone. And where not, then to follow very strict non-physical greetings, maintain social distance. And as I mentioned, at any point in time, it's a little different in different parts of the world, except when it comes to our supply chain, where I'm very proud that we've got 221 factories worldwide. And we've never had more than a single digit number of them not running at more or less full capacity.
Wow, that's impressive considering what's going on. I do wonder if you think about, I think the latest number based on the US numbers of jobless claims, it was about 30 million people. Do you think about these jobs and how many don't come back on the other side of this? And what do we need to do? Will there be reskilling involved in terms of maybe new jobs are needed? How do you think about that and your responsibility to bringing workers back? Because that's going to determine what kind of economic rebound we have.
Yeah. So first of all, if you look at the major market indices, and although there's no apparent sanity in the markets right now, it is healthcare, technology, and consumer staples are the areas where the stocks have done quite well. And we're very privileged and lucky to be in one of the sectors where consumer demand continues. So the combination of our portfolio, the financial strength in our balance sheet, and our wonderful people means we will come through this okay. We're taking every measure possible to preserve and protect all the jobs in Unilever. We have said that where we want people to take a temporary break, we don't want access to government funds. So the furloughing scheme and the temporary pay from the government, we don't believe that's designed for companies like Unilever. We also think there'll be a cost to taking that money, and we want to maintain control of our own destiny. And I can tell you the best way for us to protect jobs for everyone in Unilever is to keep the business healthy. And I think 100% of our people understand that and are focused on it. Retraining is something that we've been busy with for a long time now. And we are actually stepping up our digital learning activities. One of the lessons we learned in Italy was that when people were working from home, there was a sharp spike up in our online learning tools being used. And so I think people understand that if you have got moments where you're not at full capacity, use it to sharpen up your skills.
Alan, do you think about, though, not only your workers, but I do think about big global companies like yourself and leaders like yourself who think about other stakeholders and communities at large, those workers who maybe lose jobs elsewhere? Do you feel like you're going to think about helping others reskill, that maybe you can hire them or somehow help them, on a kind of grander basis?
So there are sectors of the economy where there's a surge in requirement for work. And, I'm delighted that many people have repurposed into other sectors of the economy. Frankly, I don't think we'll be hiring huge swathes of new people. What we are doing is mobilizing within Unilever, where already we've had over 3,000 people now who are in a part of the business that's maybe not running at full capacity, and we've moved them over through an internal jobs workplace. And actually, I'm involved in some work with the United Nations on creating job markets for particularly young people to reskill and find new jobs. I think what you're getting at is an important question. We're all very focused right now, as we should be, on coronavirus and COVID-19. But the other big problems in the world, things like climate change and inequality, are not going away. And I truly hope that as we start to rebuild after this dreadful epidemic, as we start to rebuild, that we don't take our eye off the important work on climate change and inequality, because those problems will haunt us unless we deal with them and deal with them quickly. And there's a tension. Young people are feeling let down. They knew there were warnings about global pandemics that went unheeded. Those same young people have heard the warnings about climate change, are fed up with inequality, and are not tolerant of the retreats to nationalism that we're seeing from national governments. And so on the other hand, cheap energy prices does encourage move back to older forms of energy, and different types of chemistries. And so, you can tell Unilever has always tried to be on the leading edge on sustainability. And we hope that this will be a pivot point for the world.
I do wonder about the balance between profits and doing the right thing and protecting your workers, because I do think, especially in a challenged economy, in a recession, that's going to be a very difficult thing going forward.
It is, although I think if you frame the recovery from coronavirus as economy versus health, it's a false framing. We've got to manage a return to health and a return to economic activity. In the same way, we shouldn't talk about purpose over profits. We truly believe that by positioning our brands on doing real good in the world, by running our supply chain in a sustainable way, by being a responsible employer and creating great opportunities for people, a byproduct will be better financial performance. And I really hate to set up some trade-off on purpose versus profits.
I want to ask you, I'd be remiss not to ask you about the outlook. And I think, I've never seen an environment, I've been doing this for a couple of decades, never seen an environment where more companies, household brands can come out and say, I have no visibility. I'm withdrawing my guidance for the year because I don't know. And investors are okay with it because we understand the environment. What does the global economic environment look like to you, especially when even today I was looking at stories, people are talking about a 2-year outbreak of the virus, that it's going to take much longer to get through this. I am just curious how you see it. How do you see the global economy? What will consumer demand look like once we all start to re-enter the economy again?
Well, Carol, I want to be realistic about this. We withdrew our guidance because the guidance gets used to a false level of precision, to within a percentage point or two, and the world is too uncertain for that right now. However, there are some things that are known. We are going into a recessionary environment, and all companies, ourselves included, should be thinking about value propositions and making sure that cash-starved consumers are able to access high quality products at the lower cost end of the pricing spectrum, and we're busy with that. Secondly, people are very fearful, and so hygiene, cocooning, the distance economy, staying at home, those are all going to be big trends. And I do think that there's going to be a secular shift from out-of-home consumption of food more back into in-home consumption. We're preparing for that. I think it's also the advent, a huge digital accelerator. I was living in China in the early 2000s, in 2010, when after SARS, swine flu came along. And that was one of the moments in time when Alibaba saw a step change in their business. And I think how we shop, how we consume media, how we pay for things, how we live our lives is becoming more and more digital, and this is going to become definitely an accelerator. I saw today that automatic teller machine ATM usage in the UK is down 60% versus a year ago, and people are shifting to online transfer of funds, and I think that's an early indicator. So we can be pretty sure of recessionary times, a step up in digital, shifts in consumer consumption, a preoccupation with health and well-being, and we're reorientating our portfolio priorities, our innovation, our channel choices, our science bets, all in those types of directions. And that's not to say that we're going to then go back and put a very fine precision point on what our outlook is for the business, but the macro trends are very clear.
I do have to ask you, Alan, and just kind of quickly, because I know you guys have certainly Unilever has put out stuff about what brands kind of have done well, if you will, in the lockdown. What brands, beyond the kind of obvious hygiene ones, have proven to be the most resilient? Which ones have kind of lagged?
Yeah, so it's not so much at a brand level. It is more at a category level, where it won't surprise you. We've got a big business that supplies restaurants with food service products. That's not doing well at all right now. We're the biggest ice cream company in the world, and
I've
you can
eaten a lot
imagine.
at home.
I like it. So get your Ben and Jerry's and your good humor and your Briars in. We obviously the tourist and leisure destinations where at this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, those are way down. On the other hand, as I mentioned, hand hygiene, surface hygiene, and particularly in-home eating, we underestimated the impact that in-home eating would have. From a brand lens, what I would say is that this is a time when people need trusted brands. And so actually our biggest, oldest brands are doing very well right now. And we know that. You see, we're used to crises, whether it's a currency crisis in Latin America, a geopolitical crisis in the Middle East, economic meltdown in Southeast Asia. We pretty much know that in crises, big brands, trusted brands tend to do quite well.
I have to say, we've been having a conversation that your Ben & Jerry's Netflix and chilled flavor, that maybe you should do some specific marketing around it with everybody staying at home and streaming. It's just an idea. Are you thinking about that?
We'll give you a cut on that one, Carol. Thank you.
Deal. I want to bring in a question from our Breakaway members, and this is from Zarananu at Gap Square in the UK, and says, putting equality and diversity at the heart of recovery post-COVID can help accelerate progress, but it's often missed in such conversations. How do we put equity center stage? Alan, how do we do that? We've had these conversations about inequalities for years, and the virus has certainly laid them bare once again. How do we put equity center stage?
So there's a guy called Walter Schneidel at Stanford who has written that the only step changes in economic inequality that happen in the world tend to happen after wars or crises. That one particular inequality that we're very focused on is gender inequality. And we think about it in three layers. First, we have to get our own house in order. And our non-executive board and our management team is now, both of them are exactly 50-50 men and women. But now we have to start thinking about what's our role in society, creating opportunities for women through our extended operations, but also through our brands. That's one form of equality. I think the other one that's going to become very apparent is income inequality. And we do believe in a redistributive model of capitalism. I think the model of capitalism that's evolved over the last 20 years is going to have to change. And some of the changes that will need to happen are pricing in externalities like carbon, moving to disclosure of non-financial performance in the business. And it is going to have to be a more equal distributive model of capitalism to survive in a fairer world.
Ask you about supply chains. A question coming in from Orestes Nicolou from Just Park, based in London. Are you having to rethink your supply chain layout strategy as a result of the crisis? Should countries be manufacturing more in their own countries rather than depending on outsourcing? So you guys do a lot of local manufacturing and manufacturing and producing in the markets you sell. Will we see even more of that going forward?
We mostly make local for local. So most of our manufacturing happens, if not in the country, but certainly in the region where the sale happens. But what's not always local for local is the supply chain that sits behind that. So the procurement of materials, packaging, forms, and that's where we are working to build in more redundancy. So the resilience of one supply chain requires, I think, a degree of localization, which we already have, but also making sure that you're not over-dependent on one supply line for, frankly, any material. And that's what we're busy with right now, is creating that redundancy in our material and packaging supplies.
Alan, do you think too about, certainly this played out in the United States, President Trump putting pressure on a company like 3M not to sell their N95 masks outside the United States? Do you anticipate coming off of this that we'll see more government pressure on companies to hold on to goods that are manufactured in their own countries?
I think there'll be some. I think that was the example you're giving is a particularly extreme case. More broadly, what we're seeing is a retreat to nationalism on lots of fronts, and we are wholeheartedly against that. We think that multilateralism, global trade, has been very good for lifting everyone out of poverty. If you look at the statistics, actually, we live in a less unequal world than 10 years ago. And the reason for that is because China and India have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And the way they've been able to do that is through global trade. So we fear a retreat to nationalism. It is not good for trade. It's not good for economies. And it's certainly not good for solving these big transnational problems like climate change that are going to require collaboration. So I think, trying to restrict one particular material to your own country is the very thin end of a bigger wedge, which is the harm that can come if we abandon all the progress that's been made through multilateralism in the last few decades.
Alan, I do wonder if, being on the front line through all of this, if there was one lesson you can share with our audience about what you were prepared for, and if there was one thing that you wish you had in place heading into the pandemic.
Yeah, I think the two things that we are greatly relieved about are that we had a reflex to look after people first. And I think, the poll shows everyone's instinct is to do the same thing. We were in a lucky situation also, though, of being in a financially conservative position. And even despite that, we went to the bond market and topped up for a couple of billion euros of cash to cover any long-term debt that would come due in the next 12 months. I think at this moment in time, there's a lot of talk about scenario planning. We're actually moving away from scenario planning and trying to focus on building agility and responsiveness into the company. And I don't know that we should all be spending too much time locking in particular views or scenarios for the future, but rather unleashing the trapped capacity that most big organizations have by letting go and letting people close to the markets, close to the front line, exercise their judgment and their decision making. That is, we've discovered a new responsiveness in Unilever that I wish we had unlocked years ago, but it's taken this crisis to do that.
Just to sum up, and I do wonder, do you fear a second wave? Do we as companies, as leaders, have to be pandemic proof going forward?
I don't know how you become fully pandemic proof. It's going to you're really asking a biological question there. And yeah. I pray for enormous progress on vaccines and testing, because I think there's a lot of optimism in there right now. Our track record in the world on producing vaccines for coronavirus type disease is poor. And I think that's the biggest breakthrough that we need. Beyond that, it's absolutely inevitable that there'll be second, third, and fourth wave outbreaks of this. And so we should all be in a mode that this type of disease is here to stay, and capture the lessons of the moment, because we'll definitely need to open this playbook again in the future.
A question just came in, and I just want to squeeze it in. Will PPE, protective consumer protection, whether it's, pick your gear, will this become a sustained level of new normal demand? Is it just going to be our way of life going forward? This is Steve Papermaster, CEO of Nano, putting this question.
Well, having spent 13 years of my life living in Asia, where it's quite normal for people to be wearing face masks. And from the West, we often found this quaint or amusing or somehow an overreaction. I am quite sure that trend of wearing a mask, not just to protect yourself, but to be thoughtful and considerate of other people, is something that will become a new global norm. I don't know if anyone on the call or you, Carol, have ever worn an N95 mask for any period of time. It's extremely unpleasant. It is a very suffocating feeling. It's yet another hardship that our frontline health workers have had to endure. But wearing those lighter masks, yes, I do think those will become a norm in the West, as they have been for quite some time now in the East.
And I do have to ask you one other thing. Purpose-led companies like yourself, are they under more pressure, or do they become more of a thing going forward that employees want to work at purpose-led companies, consumers want to buy from them? I'm just curious, in terms of coming out of this on the other side, do you think they become even more important, or are they going to be under more pressure because we're going to be in a rough economy?
Our company is guided by three very deeply held beliefs. The first is that brands with purpose grow, that companies with purpose last, and that people with purpose thrive. And we think that refrain is going to be even more relevant in a post-coronavirus world than it was in a pre-coronavirus world. We're sure that young consumers coming through the population will really care about the behavior of brands and companies. And we know 100% for sure that people entering the workforce want to come and work for companies who do the right thing by society, do the right thing by the environment, and do the right thing by their employees. So we will not waver one iota in our commitment to purpose-led business.
All right, Alan, I'm going to have to leave it on that note. I could talk to you for hours, but I'm getting yelled at that we've got to go. So I wish you good luck with everything, and look forward to talking to you again on the other side of this. Good luck with all your efforts. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right, Alan Jope, everybody. All right, before we move on to the next part of our program, I do want to remind everybody, send those questions. You've been great. I'm trying to squeeze in as many as I can. Do engage with us on social media. Our hashtag is hashtag Bloomberg Breakaway. All right, now it's my pleasure to introduce two people who are really operating at the top tier of corporate communications, and they've been hearing from so many different companies like Alan's, that kind of company, and others, all different sizes. If I ever get into trouble, this is certainly my dream team. First, we have Richard Edelman. He's president and CEO of Edelman. It's a global communications firm. It's got about 6,000 employees in more than 60 offices around the world. Also with us is Judy Smith, a renowned crisis management expert, founder and president of Smith & Company, a full-service crisis management and communications firm. So welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. I do want to kick off our discussion with a quick poll, just kind of gauge our audience. And the question is, everybody, if you can do this poll, how can CEOs best demonstrate leadership during this time? The choices are clear and transparent communication to all stakeholders, working with other CEOs and policymakers to implement solutions, prioritizing employee health, safety, and job security, and then the fourth choice, finding ways to support communities. And so let's start there. And I'm going to start with you, Judy. What do you think? What do you think CEOs how they can best demonstrate leadership during this time?
I think a few ways. I think number one, demonstrating independent leadership, right? I think most people really respond to the fact that there's not a reliance on information that's not accurate, right? That you want to rely on medical information. I think that's one. So seeing CEOs make their own decisions despite other information. I think the other thing that is important that people want to see from CEOs, and it goes back to something Alan was saying, was, what structure, what tools, what safety measures are you going to put in place for employees? Because those are people that are on the front line. What we're hearing from companies and employees, a recent survey said that over 55% of employees were afraid and concerned to come back. And so I think that is going to be critical for any CEO in how to address that issue. So I think those two key points are important.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I'm hearing that a lot about people, just from colleagues, from peers, from family, about the nervousness going back to work. Richard, come on in on this. What's your thought about how CEOs can best demonstrate leadership during this time?
So I think in the first phase, it was about working from home, protecting the employees. Second phase was what kind of products we can offer. For example, HP sending 3D printers to make masks at hospitals that were running out. And now the third phase is going to be return to work. And I think actually business has been in the passenger seat and let government drive the car. And in this next phase, we can't be hurried. We have to be sure that we're actually ready to go back to work, that it is safe. We also need to change our workplaces so that in Edelman, for instance, we're going to run an A and B shift that has therefore half as many people in the office at a time. And so we have to show different. Again, if you're opening restaurants, be like Starbucks so that you don't actually have any people sitting in the store. You basically do takeout for a while until the COVID passes. But CEOs actually now have to stand up and speak up. We actually found that there wasn't a single op-ed from a CEO for the past 3 weeks in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, or the FT. CEOs have been so bunkered and focused on their own operations, they have to speak publicly. They have to show public leadership now to explain what the new normal is going to be. It can't be just a return to the old way.
Yeah, and yes, please, Judy, come on in. No, come on in.
I was going to say regarding the CEOs and leadership. I think to your point about being visible, right? The CEOs that we have talked to are not only concerned about their employees and other stakeholders, but also to what they can do, as Alan was saying, on a bigger landscape, right? And a bigger picture to be able to help and assist. And I think that also helps to define their personal brand as a CEO and their company brand as well.
And what's interesting is, and this came up with Alan, and I'm curious what you guys are hearing from your clients and what advice you're giving them about this balance between protecting your employees, doing right by your broader community, whether it's your supply chain, your consumers, your customers, versus you got to make money, right? And there's going to be pressure to do that in an economic environment that is subpar. So, Richard, what are you hearing about how do you balance that?
You can't allow a trade-off between health and economic growth. We have to find a way to make sure that we change our business model in such a way as to emphasize the products that will help, cure or deal with COVID. That we have to be about solutions and not selling. It's really a trap for business to be seen as pushing for too early a return to normal. Let the governors do that. That's not the job of CEOs. CEOs should make sure that their businesses run well. Also, trust is now conveyed locally. The most trusted institution is my employer, and therefore the CEO has to speak very frequently to his or her employees so that they actually then can spread information to the communities. You asked about that in the beginning. there's a
Mm-hmm.
big skepticism about mainstream media, well, whether it's politicized, not Bloomberg, by the way. And the reality is that people
Good
on the
answer.
left, people on the left have a certain predilection for MSNBC, on the right for Fox, and
Right.
where are we getting quality information? And it's not necessarily from government. So therefore, business has to fill the void. Be sure that it's the CEO plus the health experts in the company, and make sure that there's a frequency, a cadence, so that people can count on us. For example, at Edelman, I'm appearing every week to our people with Dr. David Nabarro, who's an advisor to the WHO, about progress on COVID. What's Edelman doing? What are we seeing? So that our people can then know what's good for their families and also for their clients.
A lot of communication. Judy, what do you think?
I totally agree.
Think we're having a little bit of audio trouble there. We're going to try and fix Judy's audio, and then we'll bring her right back in. Richard, I want to go to a question, if I may, from our audience, because one was specifically for you. This is from Evan Makovsky, and he runs his own integrated communications company. He says, what do you think the opportunities are for PR firms coming out of this crisis? Broadly speaking, what types of messaging do you expect to be in demand by clients for firms like yours?
Hi, Evan. Look, at the moment, there's this sense among marketers that brands should be quiet during COVID, that it's not good to put your ads next to disturbing material on news or other. That's a mistake. Brands have to speak up now. Now, we actually did a special trust report, and we found that 90% of people expect brands to talk to them frequently, to give lower prices to those who are affected by COVID, whether in health or losing their job, and that brands are a critical source of information. It's this idea of brand democracy. So I think that communications firms should be pushing their clients to do great ideas. Example, for Unilever, we're doing a campaign called Day of Service, where on May 21st, Unilever will donate all of its production from its 14 factories in the U.S. To people who are disadvantaged through Feeding America. That's the indication of the power of a good idea, well executed with clients. So, Evan, go get them.
And I want to bring her back into this. Judy, go ahead and respond to, I know we were talking earlier about that balance between doing the right thing, protecting your workers, protecting all of your stakeholders. And then also you got to be profitable, and you're going to do that in a global economic environment that's subpar. What's the balance? What are you hearing? What are you telling your clients?
Sure. Richard is correct, which is that we can't trade off health and safety for profits, right? What we're telling our clients is, yes, you have to keep your business running, but you need to do it in a way that is consistent with your values side, what employees want to hear.
I think we're having some problems again with Judy's audio, so we'll try and fix that. Richard, I want to go on to some other questions that are coming in, because you and Judy both run companies. You're leaders of companies. You have your own employees to be concerned about. Tell us about some of the things that you're doing specifically to make the steps you're taking to make sure that your office environment is safe for people when they come back. And that's coming in. Actually, we have a question. That's Walter Johnson, Acme United Corporation, sending that in.
So we're going to have staggered work hours. We're going to allow people to, come early or come late, go home later early. We're going to close the cafeteria. We're going to make sure that there's a protocol for the coffee machine. People are going to be asked to wear masks, and we're going to be wearing gloves. And we're going to not have more than 4 or 5 people in a meeting. And we're not going to allow global travel initially. We're going to have to find a protocol for calling on clients, such that there's some kind of temperature test or other that is instituted at our clients. We're asking people also, if they feel lousy, take a sick day. We'll give you as many as you want, because the basic mentality is quite, usually like the Marines, tough it out, make it through. No, we don't want that. We want to fundamentally change the contract with our workforce.
Ways will we fundamentally change how we work in the longer term, or is it hard to say? And I think we've all been having these discussions about working from home. I had a conversation with Meg Whitman. She's like, I've been working in an office for more than 40 years. Here I am at home, and I'm pretty productive. And I'm doing radio shows. I'm doing conferences at home that I never thought I could do, and they go fairly well, although we're having a few technical problems, as we know. What do you think? Do they stay with us longer term? Will people travel less, or is it too early to say?
There's a big question mark around conferences, and also travel. Last year, I traveled 130 days. Is that the new normal for a CEO? Not so sure. But I love brainstorms for clients and coming up with ideas, sitting around a table on a whiteboard, and I miss that. I also miss the camaraderie and the kind of necessity of human contact. And so I am trying to evaluate how much office space over time Edelman's going to need, and how many offices we're going to need. And, also I've made a lot of journalist relationships by entertaining and having personal connection. And, having a beer on Zoom works if you know the person already, but it's not so easy to meet new people that way.
Definitely changes the dynamics. We do have Judy. I know we only have her by audio. We're having some trouble with the video side of it. But Judy, what are your thoughts about, first of all, as a leader of a company, you have to think about your employees too, coming back, they're nervous. So what steps are you taking to make them feel safe? And do you think the way we're working and how we work changes in the long term, or is it too early to know?
I think it is going to change, and I'll take the second question first. I think it is going to change in the long term. The companies that we are talking to are like, well, we didn't actually think we could work from home. And now we see that we can, and that is successful. So I think that companies are going to start to rethink that. The way that companies are thinking about bringing back employees are more obviously staggered, but they're looking at groups that actually work together, right? So you're not going to bring back all employees back, but perhaps you might bring back the advertising and marketing department together. For me, as a leader of a communications company, what I am looking at is how we come back. Do we come back all at once? As Richard said, I am looking at whether we need all the real estate that we have that we're currently using now. We are going to, when we come back, make sure that we do it in a staggered way. But I'm going to take my own advice as I continue to communicate, that it has to be visible, right? People have to see you. It has to be transparent. I think it has to be authentic. And you have to have a balance, I think, between realism and being optimistic. And you have to make sure that people understand that that you care, and that their health and safety and well-being is critical. Depending on your size of your company, everybody can't do that. But one of the needs that we saw at my company was that a lot of the employees didn't have masks and just were in a panic about it. And so as a company, we provided that to our employees.
So here's a great question coming in. Ronaldo Garcia with Siemens in Colombia asking, which is the main challenge that you see to motivate the people to continue contributing under the current situation of lockdown? And Richard, I guess it has to do with working people at home, your managers trusting you. I have to say, I've been as busy as ever before and probably more productive because I don't have as many interruptions. But I am curious about how you manage people who are working from home. It's a little different.
Well, you have to have a broad approach. I mean, I have a woman who works with me on the Unilever business, and she has little kids. And if at a given point, we're supposed to have a call, and a kid is not perfect at the moment, she has to deal with that. And I said, call me back, and you have to be flexible. And people are doing conference calls from closets and otherwise. It's a very different deal. I get surround sound from a parakeet from my stepson. I mean, it's not the usual deal. Got to have a sense of humor. But I think the most important thing for employees is tell them the truth. If your business is going to be challenged and you're going to have to reduce salaries or furloughs or whatever, be direct, explain the business situation, make it entirely clear that you have every interest in making sure that people are fine, but that they deserve honesty and directness and frequency of communication, because the biggest challenge at this time of COVID is misinformation. People literally pass rumors around as if they're truth. And, literally a rumor from Malaysia about you have ice cream and it causes your throat to open to COVID. So ice cream sales plunge. That kind of need to respond immediately to false is urgent for what PR people do.
That's exactly what Alan Jope talked about with someone who works in his home that had heard from her circle that ice cream was bad and they weren't eating ice cream. Judy, got a question for you. This comes from John Dorson of Akara Strategy. It says, apart from crisis management, what has been the most crucial demand in terms of communications?
Oh, wow. I think apart from crisis management, for us, the most crucial demand really is helping CEOs navigate the balance of all of their stakeholders, right? And the other crucial demand is making sure that those CEOs are making the right decision based on the right information. And so what we did to help that is we partnered with Johns Hopkins, and what we've been doing is providing briefings to all of our clients so that they are getting straightforward scientific information. And that's been really helpful, because early on that was very paralyzed, and even now. So those are those kinds of things that we're doing.
I also do wonder, and this is a question that's come from several of our audience right now, just wondering about life after and what does it mean for consumer habits? I mean, you guys have to advise clients and companies. What do you think consumer habits are like on the other side of this, Richard?
So, for example, we work with a hotel chain, and their initial instinct was, let's try and open the properties. And we said, no, you need an interim step where you have a serious health expert go around and develop a protocol that says, we have a community health test. We have a temperature test for employees. We also have criteria for those who are coming to our property, meaning guests, because any one of those can contribute to an outbreak. And so there's a 3-step: close, healthcare, reopen. And the reopen is, in fact, has to be done in a different way. So we said, make your products from the local community more, so that, in fact, you are supporting the community in need. And so anyway, it's reconsidering your business, change the reality of your business. It's not a communications problem. It is a business problem.
Judy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a business problem, but I also think on the hotel side, let's think about this. If you are deciding that you're going to travel and you're going to figure out what hotel you're going to stay at, you want to find out what policies and procedures they have put in place to make me as a visitor safe. So I do think communication does have a component to play in that, in terms of just consumers and weighing your options.
Are both of you telling your clients to plan? I talked about it with Alan Jope about this, to plan for a second wave. Richard, are you?
Oh,
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's more likely than not to happen. I don't want business to be blamed. I want business to be ready. And it's important that we make sure our products are helping solve. And it's also critical that we establish that we've thought this through, that we have a protocol, that we've been following it, and that we're going to deal very quickly if there's an outbreak. We're going to go back to home. We're going to follow the best public health guidance and try to be part of the solution.
Judy,
yeah.
are you doing
And
the
I
same
also,
thing? Yeah.
Yes, we are. But I would say that a good bit of companies that we are talking to, because they know that there's going to be a second wave, they have decided to wait until that second wave comes and passes. Because even though employees and all of us, staying at home certainly has impacted all of us, but most people are saying, if I just have to stay in for 3 more weeks or 4 more weeks because we know that something else is coming, that it's better to do that, wait until it passed, so that when you come out to the point that was raised, you get hit with this onslaught of increase in virus and death and tolls on employees. Most companies that we are talking to are waiting, or if they are going out, are not doing any more than 10% of their workforce.
Smart question coming in, and I know we've got to wrap up soon, but I want to get this in. Derek Serpaglia in Italy is saying, how do you balance the frequency and timing of internal and external communications relating to the crisis? Is too much information counterproductive? Judy, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think too much information is counterproductive. I think what people are looking for is consistency and accurate information, right? So to the point that was raised earlier, we don't need to pass rumors around or information that we can't confirm. But I think a regular cadence on communicating to stakeholders, employees, is critical. I don't think you can overdo it with, straightforward information.
Richard, your thoughts?
You have to have a regular cadence. You have to have something that people can count on. I think that information from government, from the media, from social, and then from the company become a picture. And they need to square up. People don't listen and learn the first time they hear something. They actually have deep skepticism today. And so it's like the 5th time that you hear something that you actually believe it. So we need to keep going back with messages and also allow people to have a conversation with you, that you set up a platform for questions, that you actually listen, learn, and adapt your system if, in fact, it's a better suggestion.
Yeah, and I've got to say, just one last thing. I have been amazed at companies and leaders who are out there, and then there are those who have just gone dark. And I think in the long term, that will ultimately hurt them. One last question. We've got to wrap up just quickly. What do we as leaders need to be asking ourselves in this kind of environment with what we've gone through and what we face on the other side? Judy, let me start with you.
I think the first question you want to ask yourself really is, what are we missing, right? What should we be doing that we're not doing? What should we be prepared for that we're not prepared for? And I think that they should also ask themselves, what is the future going to bring, and how do we need now to start to pivot? Because people keep saying going back to normal, going back to the way that we were, it's not possible, at least not for a very long time.
Richard?
We've made a big promise about stakeholder capitalism. Let's see business deliver. And that means we better take account of people's fears of being made redundant, also losing jobs to machines, and their own health. We've got to absolutely make sure that we're seen as a force for good. And a key part of that is talking. and helping frame a future that people can believe in.
Right. Sounds so simple, right? But we've got to get that right. Judy, thank you so much. Richard, thank you so much. Really a lot of great advice and really appreciate your time this morning. Do stay well. We do want to thank both Richard and Judy. Great conversation. Alan Jope also for his time and insights as well. And thank you all for tuning in, participating. Really wonderful questions and really spot on in terms of the issues and concerns that we all have right now. I'm sorry that I couldn't get to all of them. I could have done this for probably 5 hours. But do keep the conversation going. Reach out to Twitter and on the Bloomberg Live page on LinkedIn. This is a great way to keep it all going. We do love feedback. We know we had some problems technology-wise. It's kind of the new world order we're working in. So do take a minute to fill out our exit survey. It's going to appear on your screen at the end. We do love your feedback and love to hear about how we're doing, where we could be better. And then for ongoing COVID-19 coverage and other stories about the pandemic, we've got some great coverage on the Bloomberg and how it's impacting our world economy, how it's impacting world business. Follow Bloomberg on Twitter @business. Visit us at Bloomberg.com. And be sure to join me and my co-host, Jason Kelly, every day for Bloomberg Business Week on the radio. We're 2 to 6 p.m. Wall Street time. You can also find some of our other interviews with top business leaders on our YouTube page. And for more events like this, we're doing a lot of coverage, trying to help our community here. Please visit BloombergLive.com for the latest offerings. We'd love to have you join us on more of those events as well. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday. Do stay safe, be well, and we do hope to see you again real soon. Take care, everybody.